Someone says something critical about your work and your entire day collapses. A friend doesn't text back and you immediately assume they hate you. You see someone succeed where you failed and it confirms what you've secretly believed all along, that you're not good enough. You walk through life feeling like you're made of glass, like one wrong word could shatter you completely. And you've been told the problem is that you're too sensitive, that you need thicker skin, that you should just stop caring what people think. But what if the real problem isn't sensitivity at all? What if it's something deeper, something structural, something that was supposed to be built during childhood but never was? Carl Jung identified this as the permeable ego, a psychological condition where you have no solid boundary between your inner world and the outer world. Everything gets in. Every criticism pierces you. Every rejection confirms your worst fears. Every opinion drags you away from yourself. And you've been living like this for so long that you think it's just who you are. But Jung saw something different. He didn't see weakness or a character flaw. He saw interrupted development. He saw someone who never got the chance to build the psychological structure that makes a person resilient. Today, we're going to build that structure. We're going to understand why you're so vulnerable, why the defenses you've created don't actually protect you, and how to develop real psychological armor that doesn't make you cold or closed off, but makes you strong enough to be vulnerable without being destroyed by it. You weren't born fragile. No baby enters the world believing they're worthless or thinking they need to be perfect to deserve love. This is learned. And what's learned through painful experience can, with awareness and effort, be unlearned and rebuilt differently. Jung observed that many adults suffering from chronic emotional pain aren't weak people. They're unfinished people. They're incomplete at the exact developmental point where they should have been strengthened. The fragile ego isn't a personality trait. It's a symptom. It's evidence of an individuation process that got interrupted before it could complete. Individuation is Jung's term for the psychological journey of becoming a whole, integrated individual. And for many people, that journey never even started. Why? Because the environment they grew up in made authenticity dangerous. Imagine a child in a home where love comes with conditions attached, where being accepted requires behaving a certain way, achieving certain things, hiding certain feelings, where mistakes are treated as evidence of fundamental inadequacy, where expressing sadness is called drama, where showing anger gets you punished, where being yourself in any genuine way results in rejection, criticism, or withdrawal of affection. That child faces an impossible choice: be authentic and risk losing love, or perform an acceptable version of themselves and maintain connection. Most children, understandably, choose performance. They learn to read the room before speaking. They learn to suppress feelings that make others uncomfortable. They learn to measure their worth by other people's reactions. And with every forced smile, every swallowed opinion, every authentic impulse they deny to avoid rejection, their ego, the structure that's supposed to define who they are, becomes a little more permeable, a little more dependent on external validation, a little less solid. How can you know who you are if every real part of you has been corrected or rejected? By the time this person reaches adulthood, they might look successful from the outside. They might have achievements, relationships, a career. But inside, it all feels like theater, like they're playing a role. Because they never developed an authentic self. They developed a performing self. And the performing self is exhausting to maintain because it requires constant monitoring. Am I saying the right thing? Am I acting appropriately? Do they approve of me? Am I safe from criticism? This isn't living. This is surviving. And the cost is enormous. Without internal reference points, without a solid sense of who you are independent of others' opinions, you become psychologically homeless. Any criticism feels like an earthquake because there's no foundation to stand on. Any rejection feels like death because your sense of worth is located outside yourself, in how others treat you. Any silence from someone you care about gets interpreted as abandonment because you're scanning constantly for signs of approval or disapproval. Jung understood that this type of ego cannot handle tension, cannot tolerate ambiguity, cannot sustain itself under pressure. It collapses. Not because the person is weak, but because the structure was never built properly in the first place. It was designed for adaptation and survival, not for authentic existence. And the painful sensitivity you experience isn't a flaw in your character. It's a psychological alarm system screaming that something fundamental is missing. What you need isn't tougher skin or less caring. What you need is reconstruction from the ground up. But what have you been building instead? Most people with fragile egos don't walk around defenseless. They develop protection mechanisms. The problem is that these mechanisms aren't real armor. They're compensations. They're desperate attempts to shield a vulnerable core, and they often make things worse. Jung identified several false defenses that people mistake for strength. The first is inflated arrogance. This shows up as an exaggerated, almost theatrical confidence. The person becomes hyper-rational, dismissive, mocking of others. They position themselves as superior, untouchable, beyond criticism. But watch what happens when someone casually challenges them. The mask cracks. The reaction is disproportionate, because underneath the arrogance is terror. Terror of being exposed as inadequate, as ordinary, as wrong. Arrogance in this context isn't confidence. It's a brittle shell protecting absolute fragility. The second false defense is isolation. Cutting yourself off from deep connection, from intimacy, from situations where you might be hurt. You build walls. You keep people at a distance. You convince yourself you prefer being alone. But you're not choosing solitude from a place of strength. You're hiding from a world that feels too dangerous because you feel too vulnerable to navigate it. You're reinforcing the belief that you can't handle emotional risk, that relationships will inevitably hurt you, that you're safer disconnected. And isolation doesn't make you stronger. It makes you more afraid. What other armor have you been wearing that's actually making you weaker? If you are new to this channel, please subscribe and turn on bell notification. This helps spread the knowledge to others. The third false defense is paralyzing perfectionism. This is one of the cruelest traps. You become obsessed with doing everything flawlessly, not because you love excellence, but because you believe that any mistake, any flaw, any imperfection will confirm what you secretly fear, that you're not good enough. So you set impossible standards. You procrastinate because if you don't try, you can't fail. You obsess over tiny details that don't matter. You never finish projects because finishing means they can be judged. This isn't high standards. This is self-sabotage dressed up as conscientiousness. You're so afraid of being seen making mistakes that you never allow yourself to be seen at all. And the fourth false defense is preemptive aggression, attacking before you can be attacked, becoming hostile, sarcastic, or cruel when you feel threatened, criticizing others harshly to deflect attention from your own insecurities. This creates the illusion of strength. You seem tough, unbothered, intimidating. But it's what Jung called neurotic compensation. You're not strong, you're terrified, and you're using aggression to keep people from getting close enough to see how scared you actually are. All these false defenses share something important. They push people away. And by pushing others away, you also distance yourself from yourself. Because you can't be authentic while maintaining these masks. You can't grow while hiding. You can't heal while pretending you don't need to. These strategies might have helped you survive childhood, but they're preventing you from living now. So if everything you've built isn't real armor, what is? Where do you actually start? Jung taught that real psychological armor begins with developing what he called the observing ego. This is a part of your consciousness that can witness your experience without being consumed by it. Most people are completely identified with their emotions. When they feel sad, they are sadness. When they feel ashamed, they are shame. When they feel angry, they are anger. The emotion swallows their entire identity. But this is a trap. The observing ego creates space. It allows you to notice, I am experiencing shame right now, rather than collapsing into, I am shameful. Do you see the difference? In the first case, shame is a temporary state you're having. In the second case, shame is who you are. One allows movement and change. The other imprisons you in an identity. Developing the observer means learning to step back from the immediate emotional flood and name what's happening without merging with it. When someone criticizes you, Instead of automatically thinking, "I'm a failure," the observer notices, "There's a part of me feeling threatened right now. There's a part of me that wants to believe this criticism defines my worth. But I can see that part without becoming it." This isn't suppression. You're not denying the feeling. You're containing it without letting it destroy you. You're creating internal distance. And that distance is the foundation of real strength. Jung saw the observing ego as the bridge between conscious awareness and the unconscious forces trying to overwhelm you. When you activate this observer, you become capable of feeling intense emotions without being controlled by them. You can be angry and not act impulsively. You can be insecure and still speak up. You can be vulnerable and still maintain your center. How much of your suffering comes from believing you are your worst feelings? But developing the observer is only the beginning. You can create distance from your emotions and still be vulnerable if you're at war with parts of yourself. Jung's next crucial insight was about the shadow. The shadow is everything you've rejected about yourself, everything you were taught was unacceptable. Anger, selfishness, weakness, envy, laziness, pride, desire, fear. All the qualities you learned to hide because someone, at some point, made you believe that having these qualities made you bad, wrong, or unlovable. So you pushed them down. You pretended they didn't exist. You created an idealized version of yourself that only contains acceptable traits. But those rejected parts didn't disappear. They went underground. And from underground, they control you in ways you don't recognize. They leak out in passive aggression, in self-sabotage, in sudden outbursts you can't explain, in the harsh judgments you make about other people that are really reflections of what you hate in yourself. Jung called this projection. You see in others what you refuse to see in yourself. The person who triggers you with their arrogance? They're mirroring the pride you've disowned. The person whose weakness disgusts you? They're showing you the vulnerability you've banished. Every strong reaction to someone else's behavior is a clue about your own shadow. And until you integrate these rejected parts, you remain fragile. Why? Because a criticism only destroys you when it touches a shadow element you haven't accepted. Someone calls you selfish and you collapse in shame, not because you are fundamentally selfish, but because there's a part of you that sometimes acts selfishly and you've never made peace with that. You've never accepted that being human means sometimes putting yourself first, sometimes making choices that benefit you, sometimes saying no to others' needs. When you reject this part of yourself, any external accusation of selfishness feels like exposure of your deepest unworthiness. What are you still rejecting about yourself that gives criticism its power? The path to integrating the shadow isn't comfortable. It requires brutal honesty. Jung suggested a direct exercise. Make a list of the words that wound you most when directed at you. Weak, stupid, selfish, arrogant, incompetent, boring. Then, with unflinching self-examination, identify real moments when you've embodied those qualities. Not to punish yourself, not to confirm you're terrible, but to recognize that you're human, that you contain multitudes, that sometimes you are weak, and that's okay. Sometimes you are selfish, and that's necessary. Sometimes you are incompetent at things you're learning, and that's how growth works. When you accept the shadow, you become whole. You stop needing to be perfect to be worthy. And when someone accuses you of something you've already acknowledged in yourself, it doesn't shatter you. It just informs you. The emotional charge disappears. You can hear criticism, evaluate whether it's accurate, and respond from a place of groundedness rather than defensiveness. You're not trying to protect an idealized image anymore. You're just being real. But even with the observer developed and the shadow integrated, there's still a missing piece. You need something unchangeable at your core, something that external chaos can't touch. Jung called this developing a solid center of identity, an inner citadel. What truths about yourself remain constant, no matter what the world throws at you? The inner citadel is built from deep, personally verified truths about who you are, not aspirations, not how you want others to see you, not motivational affirmations you're trying to believe. Real evidence from your lived experience that you've gathered about your character. Many people build their identity on shifting sand. They feel good when complimented and devastated when criticized, because their sense of self is entirely dependent on external feedback. This is psychological homelessness. You have no stable ground to stand on. The citadel is different. It's constructed from observations like, I am someone who keeps my word, even when it's difficult. I remain functional under pressure. I make mistakes, but I learn from them. I care about fairness. I show up for people I love. These aren't vague positive thoughts. They're backed by specific memories, specific situations where you prove these things to yourself. When the world tells you you're worthless, when criticism tries to erase you, when someone's rejection tempts you to believe you're fundamentally flawed, you retreat to the citadel. You look at the evidence you've gathered, and you remember, I know who I am. I've proven it to myself. My worth isn't determined by this moment or this person's opinion. Viktor Frankl, who survived concentration camps, wrote about the importance of meaning that exists independent of circumstances. He observed that people who had internal purpose, internal values, internal identity that couldn't be taken from them, survived conditions that destroyed others. Your citadel serves the same function. It's the part of you that remains intact no matter what external forces attack. But how do you defend it against the most intimate attack? The voice inside your own head that knows exactly where to strike. There's a critic that lives in your mind. It sounds like you. It uses your voice. But it's not you. It's a collection of harsh judgments, punishing standards, and cruel interpretations that you absorbed from your past. Harsh parents, humiliating teachers, bullies, moments of shame and rejection that got internalized. This voice knows your vulnerabilities. It calls you incompetent when you try something new. It calls you pathetic when you fail. It calls you worthless when you feel pain. And because it sounds like your own thoughts, you believe it's telling the truth. But it's not. It's repeating old trauma. Jung developed a technique called active imagination to work with these internal voices. The method is simple but profound. Instead of just accepting the inner critic's pronouncements as reality, you personify it. You externalize it. You create a dialogue with it. When the voice says, you're going to fail, you're going to embarrass yourself, everyone will see you're a fraud, you pause. You ask, who is speaking? Where did you come from? What are you trying to protect me from? Why do you show up every time I try to grow? This questioning breaks the automatic identification. You start to see that the inner critic isn't your mature, wise consciousness. It's a frozen part of you. A part that's still operating on old survival strategies from when you were young and genuinely vulnerable. It's trying to keep you safe the only way it knows how, by making you small, cautious, invisible. And when you dialogue with it, when you treat it as a separate entity you can talk to, rather than an absolute truth you must obey, something shifts. The voice loses its authority. It starts to sound less like divine judgment and more like a scared child using the only tools it has. What is your inner critic actually afraid will happen if you succeed? Carl Rogers, who developed person-centered therapy, emphasized the importance of unconditional positive self-regard. This means extending to yourself the same compassion and acceptance you might offer a good friend. When the inner critic attacks, Rogers would suggest responding not with counter-arguments or forced positivity, but with gentle acknowledgement. Yes, I made a mistake. Yes, I felt afraid. Yes, I'm not perfect. And I'm still worthy of my own kindness. This isn't about eliminating self-reflection or accountability. It's about changing the tone. Moving from hostile internal judgment to supportive internal feedback. The inner critic operates on the assumption that harshness is what motivates you, that if you're not constantly punishing yourself, you'll become lazy or arrogant. But research consistently shows the opposite. Self-compassion leads to more resilience, more persistence, and more genuine growth than self-criticism. When you treat your mistakes with curiosity instead of contempt, you actually learn from them. When you treat your fears with understanding instead of disgust, you actually become braver. The inner critic doesn't make you better, it makes you smaller. And part of building mental armor is learning to recognize when that voice is speaking and choosing not to obey it. Not to silence it by force, but to understand it, thank it for trying to protect you, and make a different choice. What would you attempt if that voice couldn't stop you anymore? But there's one final element Jung considered essential to psychological resilience: the ability to hold paradox. To recognize that two seemingly contradictory things can both be true. You can receive criticism that has valid points and still maintain your sense of worth. You can acknowledge your flaws and simultaneously know you're valuable. You can be afraid and courageous at the same time. You can fail at something and not be a failure as a person. Most people with fragile egos collapse under paradox. They think in absolutes. Either I'm good or I'm bad. Either I'm succeeding or I'm worthless. Either people accept me or I'm unlovable. This black and white thinking makes you brittle. Any evidence that you're not perfect becomes evidence that you're terrible. Any moment of struggle becomes proof of complete inadequacy. But life is not binary. People are not binary. You are not binary. You contain contradictions. You're capable and limited, strong and vulnerable, kind and selfish, wise and foolish, all at once. And that's not confusion. That's completeness. Jung's process of individuation is about integrating all these contradictory parts into a coherent whole. Not by eliminating contradiction, but by developing a self that's large enough to contain it. When you can hold paradox, criticism stops being an existential threat. Someone points out a mistake and you can think, yes, I made an error in this specific situation, and I'm still a competent person overall. Someone rejects you and you can recognize, this person doesn't want a relationship with me, and I'm still lovable to others and to myself. The ability to hold these tensions without collapsing into shame, without swinging to defensive arrogance, without needing to resolve the discomfort immediately, this is advanced psychological armor. How much suffering comes from needing everything to be simple and certain? Building mental armor isn't about becoming emotionally numb or disconnected. It's not about developing so much distance that nothing touches you. Jung never advocated for that. What he proposed is something more nuanced and more powerful. A self that's strong enough to be vulnerable. A structure solid enough that you can open your doors without fear of collapse. When you have a strong observing ego, you can feel deeply without being destroyed by feeling. When you integrate your shadow, you can be honest about your flaws without hating yourself for them. When you build an inner citadel of core truths, you can weather external storms without losing yourself. When you dialogue with your inner critic instead of obeying it, you reclaim authority over your own mind. And when you learn to hold paradox, you become flexible instead of brittle, complex instead of fragmented. This isn't a quick fix. Individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, is the work of a lifetime. But every step you take toward these capacities changes your relationship with suffering. Criticism still hurts, but it doesn't destroy. Rejection still stings, but it doesn't define you. Failure still disappoints, but it doesn't erase your worth. You're not bulletproof in the sense that nothing affects you. You're bulletproof in the sense that you have the structure to withstand impact without shattering. You have the foundation to feel everything and still remain whole. And that's not weakness pretending to be strength. That's real strength. The kind that allows you to stay open, stay engaged, stay human, while also staying intact. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and share your thoughts in the comment. If you are new to this channel, please subscribe.